Hi and welcome to Dynamics Update. Today we are in the studio recording again, and as usual I have my colleague Gustav Sundblad with me. Hello Gustav.
Hello Johan, how are you today?
I'm fine, thank you. It's a bit warm outside and
Yes.
I don't have vacation yet, so except for that everything is fine.
It could be better, yeah.
Yes, but we also have a guest. So today is not like the regular interview thingy. We have a subject we want to discuss, and therefore we have brought in expertise.
Yes.
Yes. So we have with us Eric Westerlund.
Hello, guys,
Hello.
and really happy to be here.
Welcome.
Thank
Yes.
you.
So who are you?
Well, I'm a colleague of yours, also working at Engage Group, but in a different department called Advisory, which is working in and around our implementations, helping customers in all stages of implementing Dynamics.
Great. You also did a webinar recently regarding the topic that we want to discuss today, specifically global rollouts.
Yes.
So that's kind of an area close to heart for you. So in your mind, how would you define a global rollout?
Well, we have a lot of different customers and clients implementing Dynamics all over the world, and some are smaller and some are larger. And this topic specifically is aiming at a little bit of the larger customers, having their business in countries in more than one continent, I would say. That's typically where we draw the definition of where you want to implement Dynamics across multiple continents in multiple countries.
Yeah.
And it's a specific topic on its own, because it's the typical issues is that you have different both different time zones and different culture and different types of companies across your organization.
Yeah, different teams as well,
Different
I would
teams,
imagine. Yeah.
yes. And the typical issues, I mean, the scenario is a company wants to implement Dynamics across its entire organization to enable a business change or an application change. They start with a roadmap, and they start with a pilot, for instance. They from that pilot they want to roll it out or implement that pilot across all their countries.
They don't want to do a big bang, you say?
Yes, that's.
I wonder why.
Yeah, very difficult to do, but. Since it's, I mean, even implementing in one country is complex enough that you can fail.
It can be a local big bang as well, of course. But
so doing it in multiple countries at the same time is very difficult, especially across continents.
Yes, of course.
So, so the topic is basic. I mean, the issue is that you do your first implementation over and over again, which leads to a timeline that could span multiple years, or for the larger clients, 10 plus years. Yeah. You're tying up resources, you're tying up your employees, you're building a huge budget for a rollout that could be much shorter in time.
Yeah, absolutely.
And the key question is, how can you get there? How can you reduce what are some tools and mindsets you can use to shorten that rollout time?
Of course. And also if in 10 years time the first implementation has already changed, right? So you need to kind of to make it a valuable business investment, you need to shorten that time period from start to finish.
Yeah.
So basically what you're saying is that we are striving for the possibility to automate our rollout. Once we've done the first rollout, we want to reuse as much as possible from that first rollout in order to make the next one and the next one and the next one simpler.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And it's a bit. I mean, you're onto something here, and it's a little bit like the agile mindset, right? You're doing something over and over again, but in iterations, and you need to think about what can you do to minimize make each iteration more efficient. That's the key.
So you're trying to basically create the least common denominator, which fits every single company in the entire structure, and then you do like basically just the gaps from that from that standard.
Yep.
Yeah.
It's interesting because I mean, Johan and I are leaning towards the technical area. I think a lot of the interview guests we've had are also a bit technical. So it's fun to have one from the functional side, because it's one thing like mapping the integrations, doing the rollout, platform stuff. I think that's complicated enough from a local versus global perspective. But as I mentioned before, I think from my perspective in the global rollouts, it's always been like an organizational struggle. How do you make that work? So I would imagine it's hard to do that, template mapping, or how do you figure out what is part of the template across multiple organizations? Even though it's one global organization, you have a lot of local teams, right? So the technical parts are pretty much easy to solve, but the functional parts must be much harder.
Yeah, and I think both the functional parts, but also the organizational parts, like you mentioned, it's companies are... they struggle with, like you mentioned, the technical parts. What should the template look like in terms of installation? How many instances should we have? What type of scope in terms of functionality should we have? And all of those things are tangible and are easy, relatively easy to set. But what comes next is the difficulty in organization, readiness, training, sequencing. How do you make that more efficient when it's not just working with code and configuration?
Exactly.
And there is also a very important part in this, and that's trying to maintain. You mentioned the word template before, but trying to maintain the template over time. So being able to be a bit tough and push back on all new changes that are coming in. Of course, we need new changes because we need new legal requirements and so on, but also be able to say, no, this is not must have, this is nice to have, and this is not part of the template. So we will do that later.
Yeah. And that's a very interesting topic regarding
who decides.
Exactly. And it's actually one of the most difficult topics for companies that I worked with, because you have this struggle between efficiency and making your organization work towards best practice processes, how Dynamics works.
Yeah.
That's the goal. But since you have you have differences between how everybody works across the globe. They don't work the same in North America as in South America, as in Asia, as in Europe. They have different ways of working, and they have worked the same way for 10, 15, 20 years.
Yeah, and I think that you touch on a very important point here, because I think the question you need to ask is, why do they work differently? Do they work differently because it's a different, they're used to working differently, or do they work differently because the rule set in that country requires them to work differently? That's two completely different things, because the fact that they absolutely must legally work differently, that is something that we need to take into account.
Yeah,
that is something that we need to manage. But if it's just because they always have done it in a certain way, that's something we need to be able to push back on and say, okay, so this requires resources to build it the way you want it to work.
Yeah.
Are you absolutely sure that you need to do it this way, and why?
Leading question, are you absolutely sure? But that must be a bit easier now with the business process catalog available to us. So it's not only like system functionality, this button can do that and this button can do that. It's easier now to kind of visualize a standard process and how it works with all those different levels that we have available to us now. I would imagine, at least, and it makes it easier to say, okay, any deviation from this standard process must be, it must be clearly decided upon, because it leads to, as you say, it's a customization. Maybe not in X++, maybe not in like custom integration code, but it's a customization in the way the system functionality works and the way the system process works.
I think I actually had this discussion over lunch today, because I think one of the most, the best ways to try to steer this process is to have everything that needs to be done that is outside of the template needs to come with the cost.
Yeah.
And if there is no way around it, if it's a legal requirement, then the cost is the cost of doing business. But if there is a cost and it's just nice to have, then someone needs to be held responsible for that cost and say, okay, so I understand that you think this is important. It will cost you this much money. Or this many resources that you need to provide to the project in order to get this done. And usually people say, well, we can't afford that. Okay.
That's a super interesting way of going about it. And what you run into typically in a global organization is the struggle between the local and the global. Because the global is the one that's pushing, and the local is the one receiving.
And the global here is like the template that we're discussing. You try to define a global template that comprises of, it can be integrations, it can be system functionality, parameters, data and code, but that's something that's common across all.
You have like global operations and global IT, which is running the program of making sure that all countries are being implemented on Dynamics 365. Those are typically the drivers, the ones that are the owners of the program. And then you have the recipients, the stakeholders of each local country that are being upgraded or implemented. And the dynamic between these two entities is something that is very important to handle, because those are the ones that are driving new functionality, new requirements, and the need for new code, for instance. And the ones that are typically very eager to keep it to standard and lower the cost are the ones that are owning the project. And that, how can you bridge this gap between those two entities? That's something that's not very easy to do.
I think it's important, as I said before, I think it's important to put a price on it. Because if you put a price on it, then someone needs to have it in their budget. And if it's free, if it's free, then everyone wants it, of course, because then it's a no-brainer. Then everyone will say yes. But if it's like, that will cost you X amount of digits.
But there's also like a mindset change here for me. I mean, looking at historically, and we've done this comparison many times, that when you had AX or any other system from like a couple of years ago, the solution to any business deviation from the process or from the system was to customize, right? Okay, you don't have it, let's build it. But now, because those were mainly the only tools available to us, but now we have so many other options in low code, no code, Power Platform. So I would imagine, Eric, that it puts more responsibility in the officers, so to speak, and the field consultants out there, that they need to understand what the change means, what this deviation, or before you can put a cost to it, because the cost is not just development hours. The cost can be maybe a Power Apps license, or it can be something else. But those tools that are now available to us, you need to understand those as well, and not only F&O Dynamics. You need to be a bit broader in how you tackle those issues.
And even if you don't build it in X++, even if you use low code, no code solutions for it, it's still maintaining it and understanding it and keeping the expertise in-house is important. I mean, the thing is, I mean, there is no way around it. The more we can peel off the solution, the cheaper it gets.
Of course,
even in the long run.
Of course. And it's same question for global versus local. Okay, 10 countries are fine. The 11th country needs a Power App. Is that something that we want to bring into the global template, or is it a local deviation? It's always the same question.
And what I try to do when I help clients categorize this is you try to break it down into solution pieces, where you have the two components, you could say, of template functionality, which is shared across. You have like basic template functionality, which is typically financial and basic setup functionality, which is shared across all your legal entities, all your countries. Then you have, you could argue that there is kind of an extended template functionality, which some countries might have production, some countries might have pre-sales or sales, and some might not. So there are a set of your countries have that template functionality, but it's shared. But when you go out of those two components, you end up in what is called what we call a local functionality, and that could be either two categories. Either you have, like you mentioned, Johan, you have a functionality needed to support or to follow local rules and regulations. That's something you have a way of recording taxes. You have a way of handling number sequences and all of that could be something that has to be done. And that's something you just have to plan for. You can't get around it. But then you end up in the final bucket, which is not needed it's for local use, and it's not needed for local or for rules and regulation. What do you do with that?
Yeah.
And that you can say you have three different ways or many different ways. One is, of course, budget. It's very important and very strong tool, putting a shared budget and minimizing the budget for that kind of development.
Yeah.
Other two components are process, making sure that you have the trust from the business to say that we work with this after you're live.
Yeah.
Do it later. And
Nice
the third guideline is to make sure that you have a vision or a theme or a guideline on what should be built as extra functionality for just your country.
Yeah.
And a guidance for that, I usually ask, are you doing different things or are you doing things differently?
Yeah.
If you're doing different things than your other countries, then that's functionality that you need that we haven't built yet. So you can do it either as an extended pilot and roll it out to more countries like you. But if you're doing things differently, then you really need to ask yourself why many times.
Yeah.
Why can't you do it like all the other countries? And then it becomes more of a change management
and going back to how much is it worth to you to keep doing it the same way you did it before. Because I mean, maybe we can, for a fraction of the cost, educate people on how they can do it differently. Because the thing is also, if you do it differently, it might be that you do it differently because some system that you had long ago required you to do it differently because there were limitations.
Yeah, of course.
And those limitations might already be gone. So, I mean, if you were running AX 2009 and there were things you couldn't do, so you had to build like a customization, and now that customization is no longer needed, but it means that you need to do things a bit differently than you did in 2009. Yeah, maybe that isn't a problem.
No, but that's more like change management, and that also puts an emphasis on the analysis part of these global rollouts. So I would again imagine that the key here is to, like, you need to have a balance, because you can't spend 6 months analyzing each country, because then you're at your 10 plus years timeline again. So template is one thing, but how do you reuse kind of the project phases when you do rollouts? Do you apply the same phases all the time, or do you become more efficient in your analysis as you reach new markets?
Yeah, you definitely need to be more efficient over time. And when I break it down in terms of how can we make things more efficient when you're rolling out, it's like doing it agile. You have iterations that takes time. To reduce the overall time, you either shorten the iterations or you reduce the amount of iterations that you have.
Yeah.
And preferably and probably you should do both. And a key to shortening the length of each implementation or each iteration is, as you say, moving unnecessary or moving tasks out of the structured implementation phase.
Yeah.
And typically one of these areas where you kind of get buy-in on a new process is an activity you can push out of the project and have it before as a preparation. You can have representatives for how you work, the new proposed process, train the local employees or train super users from the organization, and how is the new way of working. That is something that could be done with a business perspective, from someone from the business.
Before,
how do we work before?
Yeah. And
there are many other components in preparing. You can prepare master data. You can do master data typically master data amendment in preparation for migration is done in your source system, or can be done in your source system before you extract it. So
a lot of preparation activities then that you can reuse for each
training,
checkboxes.
You can do fit gap activities. You can do one of the really important things that you shouldn't do inside your project is stakeholder commitment and naming the stakeholders. Who from each country should participate, at what percentage and when, and have they understood how much time it takes? typically this can lead to, and this takes so much time during the implementation. People are not available. People have other assignments. They are like high season, for instance. A lack of planning in who and what people should participate in the rollout is something that leads to a lot of unnecessary time.
Yeah, so timeline planning is...
Yes, timeline planning is, and key resource availability is something that's very important. You might need to stop other projects, or you need to maybe reassign someone or hire someone to backfill for that resource for the rollout period.
I mean, having sponsorship from the top management is really, really important. Them understanding that this is nothing that we just leave to a partner to do. We need resources from the business, and those resources need to put in time to do this. So that way you need a sponsor to be able to say, okay, we accept that the fact that this person need to put 50% of its time into the project instead of doing regular work. How do we handle that?
Yeah, and from my experience, I think one other aspect of that, we had that discussion before as well, like there is such a strong key in finding the correct people here, because they also, at the same time as do like testing and training and all those like product activities, they need to be, in the best of cases, if they are ambassadors for the solution, I think that drives so much more success in any implementation project than if you just get someone that, oh, now I have to spend 50% of my time doing this, like it's a chore, rather than like, okay, I see the big picture here. We can save a lot of cost. We can grow, or whatever the main goals are of that particular project. That if you get the people to adopt that feeling, and hopefully maybe even if they come from maybe an older ERP, they move into a modern ERP and they feel like, okay, this is pretty cool. And if you get them to accept that kind of ambassadorship, it makes not only the implementation easier, also because if you're first in line, you're implemented, you go live, and then you have 11 more countries, and the main focus of the program usually shifts to those new countries, right? So, but you still have to maintain the ones that are live. And if you have good ambassadors, and now I mean like local ambassadors for that particular region, it makes it easier to drive adoption of the system and to maintain like sustainability as well as stability of the solution. So ambassadors, and not only stakeholders, because stakeholders can mainly be like, okay, I'm the manager, but they rarely work within the application. So you need ambassadors that actually do stuff, post journals.
And I mean, if we could get to a point where it's not a burden to be part of the project, it's actually an honor to be part of a project. That's great. It's a privilege to be able to shape the way we should work going forward.
Yeah.
I think that's the ideal part. But one thing you mentioned before was that, I mean, it's inevitable that when we do wave 2, for instance, we will bump into gaps that we didn't notice in wave 1 that we need to add to the template. So that an important part here is also that we are also evolving the template during the rollout. So every iteration stands on the shoulders of the previous one. We get better at it over time.
It's assimilated into the templates.
Yes,
Star Trek style.
And that's a very good topic, because that's not an easy thing to do. Because what you need to do then is you need to develop a function or an office or a group of people that has the overall ownership of the solution.
Yeah.
Across both countries that are live as well as countries that are about to be live. So you don't build something that's already planned for the countries that are live, and that you merge those two backlogs. And what do we have in our pipeline for enhancing the solution that we've already implemented, and how can we combine that with rolling out new countries? Maybe some key requirements from a group of countries that you're about to implement next year can be developed already in the maintenance for countries that are live, and then it can be tested and piloted on a country that's live, and then it can be part of the implementation phase and just tested when you go live later. And maybe you can bring people in from those countries to be stakeholders when you do the requirements and design. So you need to be very flexible between the live countries and the implement countries that are to be.
And I mean that's a very important part in this as well, because when you go live with the first wave, you go into maintenance. So all of a sudden you have an operations organization that takes care of the solution for the countries that are already live.
Yeah.
And those are not stopping. They are also developing
of
things.
Course. New
so
versions.
being, as you say, being proactive to put things that we see as a requirement maybe in 2 iterations going forward, putting that on the operations team when they have less work to do, and having them implement it for the countries that are already live, meaning that they are paving the way for our sprint further in the future in that case. So we are actually offloading things from the project and putting it into the governance organization instead, making them part of this, because we still need to, even if we make it for the country that needs it, we still need to backport it to all of the other countries. So we need, in order to have
that's a struggle.
In order to have a consistent template even after our final go live, because the goal is to go live with all of our countries, having them set up in exactly the same way where it's possible. So we still need to backport everything to the countries that are already live.
Yeah, proper gatekeeping is needed as well. I mean, here from a maintainability perspective. So it's not like high chaparral and all the local dev teams can just do what they want.
No, exactly.
So it's important to keep that control. One thing that you mentioned, speaking of this, one thing that you mentioned in your webinar is you said that the key to a rollout speed here, when we're talking about speed and waves, is a clustered rollout. And can you define what you mean with a clustered rollout?
Yes, and it relates to the two topics that I was, or the breakdown I was doing earlier, with shorter iterations and fewer iterations. Mm-hmm. And the fewer iterations part is dependent on doing multiple markets or multiple countries or multiple legal instances in the same wave. So instead of doing one country at a time or one market or one legal entity, you're doing multiple, 2, 3, 5, 7, how many you can manage. The more you can manage, the fewer iterations you have. Yeah. And doing it in this way is what we call clustered rollout, where you group a set of countries or markets based on a few parameters. And those parameters are, they can be many different things. And they can be size, geographical location, doing countries that are close to each other might be beneficial, similar size, complexity,
similar business.
Yeah, similar business, exactly. If they're sales companies, or do they have production, do they have stores, warehouse, all of those things. And one other thing that we were talking about earlier, which I think should be added, is the readiness component, which is based on this. Do we have our resources ready? Are we committed? Have we done the training? Have we prepared the master data? All of those things go into selecting and grouping and setting an overall plan. And this is a real struggle, I would say, for many clients. And you have countries that are not ready but are very important. But all of a sudden, you have maybe you buy a new country or you expand into a new country on your own, and that's high priority, and then someone gets pushed out, and it can be very difficult.
It's a moving target.
It's a moving target all the time. So and you need to have a good approach to how much can we how many can we do, and what happens if we can't do as many as we thought. What happens then? Do we move? Do everyone move in line, or do you end up last in the line?
More people to the cluster.
Yeah, exactly. How do you do? So that's it's a very complex topic, I would say, the clustering in itself.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, one factor here is as well that we had in one project is dependencies. Are there dependencies between certain legal entities and not between others? Do you, for instance, have a manufacturing company or that sells through the sales companies, and you have intercompany connections? That creates a lot of dependencies, and in that case, are you able to break those apart and deliver them separately, or do they need to be delivered as an entity, as a group?
It's a complicated puzzle, like 10,000 pieces puzzle that you need to maintain. And sometimes some pieces they break or they disappear, or you need to find them in the correct time. So it's hard.
And I think the most difficult aspect of it is that it has so many different parameters. Yeah. And what you need to do is you really need to break it down. I mean, if worst comes to worst, you just split them up, 2 in each, 3 in each, and then you just go, and that can be your baseline, and then you can shift based on every parameter you add. But you need to start somewhere and don't be overwhelmed with because each country typically also has their local opinion. We want to be first, or no, we can't do it right now because we're doing other stuff. We don't want to, or so it's you really need to just start somewhere and adjust from a baseline.
That's where the agile part comes
exactly.
in, right? To be able to adapt to reality.
Don't overanalyze in the start is something that is important, I think.
Absolutely. And a strong program management where you can actually say either, as Johan suggested, either if you don't do it, it's going to cost you this and this and this much, because that can also be another parameter. You might have license cost for legacy software that you need to kind of get rid of. So there's a lot of parameters here that drives both cost, efficiency, and, as you say, adaptability. So maybe not start with the most complicated market because of that like overwhelming factor that you mentioned, but then again, the most complicated market might be the one where you actually gain the most from your business. So it's hard.
I think this is an important thing to have in mind, and it goes across all topics that we've discussed here. It's like there isn't one aspect or dimension of this that is the silver bullet. It's not you do your cluster planning right and it will
Everything
solve.
Works. Yeah.
It's like it's the other way. It's like if you have any of these components not thought out, then it can hinder you.
No.
But it's not worth overthinking it. You just need to make sure that you have thought about all these aspects.
Yeah, and then get started.
Exactly.
And then be able to adapt. That's basically the key thoughts, right?
Yep. So don't focus in one dimension and plan it out perfectly, because there are so many different dimensions.
And in the end, if it doesn't work, Johan and I can come and fix your technical.
Build everything.
Build everything. Yeah,
exactly. We all customize the heck out of everything, and then we're done.
Everyone
one big magic button. Just press it. It'll work.
Exactly.
Everyone gets exactly what they want.
Yes.
I think we're actually running out of time.
Oh.
So I'm just going to ask you: do you have anything more you wanted to add before we say goodbye for today?
Well, there are always I can go on for days about this topic, but I think I think the last point we mentioned here is the one that you should really that really needs to be thought about. That there is no silver bullet, there is no one dimension.
Yeah.
Make sure that you have thought about all these different topics, and then you start doing it and you adapt from there. I think that's the summary that best can get you rolling in this.
Yes. Yeah, that's very good thoughts.
Yeah, I would say scale off complexity, because that is what will kill you in the end.
Yeah.
As much as you can.
Definitely.
Yeah. All right. So let's say thank you to Eric.
Thank
you for joining us and for a nice discussion.
Yes, super nice to be here, and I'll be back anytime you want me.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.